Le Poème de l'Extase on YouTube Music.
Lines 895 to 899. The more I weigh, or this dewlap. Instead of these facile and revolting lines the draft gives, I have a certain liking, I admit, for parody, that last resort of wit. In nature's strife, when fortitude prevails, the victim falters and the victor fails. Yes, reader, Pope. Line 920, little hairs stand on end. Alfred Hausmann, 1859 to 1936, whose collection, The Shropshire Lad, vies with the In Memoriam of Alfred Tennyson, 1809 to 1892. In representing perhaps, no, delete this craven perhaps, the highest achievement of English poetry in 100 years, says somewhere in a foreword, exactly the opposite. The bristling of thrilled little hairs obstructed his barbering. But since both Alfred certainly used an ordinary razor, and John Shade an ancient Gillette, the discrepancy may have been due to the use of different instruments. Line 922, held up by our cream. This is not quite exact. In the advertisement to which it refers, the whiskers are held up by a bubbly foam, not by a creamy substance. After this line, instead of lines 923 to 930, we find the following lightly deleted variant. All artists have been born in what they call a sorry age. Mine is the worst of all, an age that thinks space bombs and spaceships take a genius with a foreign name to make, when any jackass can rig up the stuff, an age in which a pack of rogues can bluff. The selenographer, a comic age that sees in Dr. Schweitzer a great sage. Having struck this out, the poet tried another theme, but these lines he also canceled. England, where poets flew the highest, now wants them to plod and Pegasus to plow. Now the prose mongers of the grubby group, the message man, the owlish nincompoop, and all the social novels of our age leave but a pinch of coal dust on the page. Line 929, Freud. In my mind's eye, I see again the poet literally collapsing on his lawn, beating the grass with his fist, and shaking and howling with laughter, and myself, Dr. Kinboat, a torrent of tears streaming down my beard as I try to read coherently certain tidbits from a book I had filched from a classroom, a learned work on psychoanalysis used in American colleges, repeat, used in American colleges. Alas, I find only 2 items preserved in my notebook. By picking the nose in spite of all commands to the contrary, or when a youth is all the time sticking his finger through his buttonhole, the analytic teacher knows that the appetite of the lustful one knows no limit in his fantasies. Quoted by Professor C. from Dr. Oscar Pfister, The Psychoanalytical Method, 1917, New York, page 79. The little cap of red velvet in the German version of Little Red Riding Hood is a symbol of menstruation. Quoted by Professor C. from Erich Fromm, The Forgotten Language, 1951, New York, page 240. Do those clowns really believe what they teach? Line 934, big trucks. I must say I do not remember hearing very often big trucks passing in our vicinity. Loud cars, yes, but not trucks. Line 937, Old Zembla. I am a weary and sad commentator today. Parallel to the left-hand side of this card is 76th. The poet has written on the eve of his death a line from Pope's second epistle of the Essay on Man that he may have intended to cite in a footnote. At Greenland, Zembla, or the Lord knows where, So this is all treacherous old Shade could say about Zembla, my Zembla, while shaving his stubble off? Strange, strange. Lines 939 to 940, man's life, etc. If I correctly understand the sense of this succinct observation, our poet suggests here that human life is but a series of footnotes to a vast, obscure, unfinished masterpiece. My goodness. Line 949, and all the time. Thus, sometime in the morning of July 21st, the last day of his life, John Shade began his last batch of cards, 77 to 80. Two silent time zones had now merged to form the standard time of one man's fate, and it is not impossible that the poet in New Y and the thug in New York awoke that morning at the same crushed beat of their timekeeper's stopwatch. Line 949, and all the time. And all the time he was coming nearer. A formidable thunderstorm had greeted Gradus in New York on the night of his arrival from Paris, Monday, July 20th. The tropical rainfall flooded basements and subway tracks. Kaleidoscope reflections played in the river-like streets. Vinogradus had never seen such a display of lightning, neither had Jacques d'Argus or Jack Gray, for that matter. Let us not forget Jack Gray. He put up at his third-class Broadway hotel and slept soundly, lying belly up on the bedclothes in striped pajamas, the kind that Zemblins call Rusker Seersucker, Russian seersucker suit. And retaining as usual his socks, not since July 11th, when he had visited a Finnish bathhouse in Switzerland, had he seen his bare feet. It was now July 21st. At 8 in the morning, New York roused Gradus with a bang and a roar. As usual, he started his blurry daily existence by blowing his nose. Then he took out of its night box of cardboard and inserted into his Comus mouth an exceptionally large and fierce-looking set of teeth, the only bad flaw really in his otherwise harmless appearance. This done, he fished out of his briefcase 2 petite burrs he had saved in an even older but still quite palatable, small, softish, near ham sandwich, vaguely associated with the train journey from Nice to Paris last Saturday night. Not so much thriftiness on his part, the shadows had advanced him a handsome sum anyway, but an animal attachment to the habits of his frugal youth. After breakfasting in bed on these delicacies, he began preparations for the most important day in his life. He had shaved yesterday. That was out of the way. His trusty pajamas he stuffed not into his traveling bag, but into the briefcase, dressed, unclipped from the inside of his coat, a cameo pink, interdentally clogged pocket comb, drew it through his bristly hair, carefully donned his trilby, washed both hands with the nice modern liquid soap in the nice modern, almost odorless lavatory across the corridor, micturated, rinsed one hand, and feeling clean and neat, went out for a stroll. He had never visited New York before, but as many near Cretans, he was above novelty. On the previous night, he had counted the mounting rows of lighted windows in several skyscrapers, and now, after checking the height of a few more buildings, He felt that he knew all there was to know. He had a brimming cup and a half a saucer full of coffee at a crowded and wet counter and spent the rest of the smoke-blue morning moving from bench to bench and from paper to paper in the west side alleys of Central Park. He began with the day's copy of the New York Times, his lips moving like wrestling worms. He read about all kinds of things. Khrushchev, whom they spelled Khrushchev, had abruptly put off a visit to Scandinavia and was to visit Zembla instead. Here I tune in. Vi nazivayet Zibya Zemberlayami. You call yourselves Zemlans. A ya vas nazivayu Zemlya Kamai. And I call you fellow countrymen. Laughter and applause. The United States was about to launch its first atom-driven merchant ship, just to annoy the Ruskers, of course. JG. Last night in Newark, an apartment house at 555 South Street was hit by a thunderbolt that smashed a TV set and injured 2 people watching an actress lost in a violent studio storm. Those tormented spirits are terrible. CXK. Test JS. The Rachel Jewelry Company in Brooklyn advertised in agate type for a jewelry polisher who, quote, must have experience on costume jewelry, end of quote. Oh, dead gray. Dead gray had. The Hellman brothers said they had assisted in the negotiations for the placement of a sizable note, $11 million. Decker Glass Manufacturing Company, Incorporated. Note, due July 1st, 1979. And Gradis, grown young again, reread this twice with the background gray thought, perhaps, that he would be 64 4 days after that. No comment. On another bench, he found a Monday issue of the same newspaper. During a visit to a museum in Whitehorse, Gradis kicked at a pigeon that came too near. The Queen of England walked to a corner of the white animal's room, removed her right glove, and with her back turned to several evidently observant people, rubbed her forehead and one of her eyes. A pro-red revolt had erupted in Iraq. Asked about the Soviet exhibition at the New York Coliseum, Carl Sandburg, a poet, replied, and I quote, "They make their appeal on the highest of intellectual levels." A hack reviewer of new books for tourists, reviewing his own tour through Norway, said that the fjords were too famous to need his description, and that all Scandinavians loved flowers, and at a picnic for international children, a Zemlin moppet cried to her Japanese friend, Ufgut, Ufgut, welcome ut Semblerland. Adieu, adieu, till we meet in Zembla. I confess, it has been a wonderful game, this looking up in the WUL of various ephemerides over the shadow of a padded shoulder. Jacques d'Argus looked for a 20th time at his watch. He strolled like a pigeon with his hands behind him. He had his mahogany shoes shined and appreciated the way the dirty but pretty boy clacked taut his rag. In a restaurant on Broadway, he consumed a large portion of pinkish pork with sauerkraut, a double helping of elastic French fries, and the half of an overripe melon. From my rented cloudlet, I contemplate him with quiet surprise. Here he is, this creature, ready to commit a monstrous act and coarsely enjoying a coarse meal. We must assume, I think, that the forward projection of what imagination he had stopped at the act on the brink of all its possible consequences. Ghost consequences, comparable to the ghost toes of an amputee or to the fanning out of additional squares which a chess knight, that skip space piece, standing on a marginal file, quote, feels, end of quote, in phantom extensions beyond the board, but which have no effect whatever on his real moves, on the real play.